everyone, I'm Dr. Pooja, MBBS, MD Physiology, and recently I cracked the DNB exam in first attempt. So yes, I can probably say that I'm MBBS, MD, and DNB Physiology, right? So yeah, in last 3-4 months the videos were not regular. I was not regular because of mainly two reasons. First is I had my DNB exam and I needed time to prepare for that exam, and second reason is my previous laptop in which I had all the material. That laptop unfortunately got stolen and I had to buy a new laptop, but I lost most of the material that I had prepared for my videos. What I learned from this is that shit happens in the life, but life goes on, right? With that being said, let's dive into today's session. Today's session is going to be a short MCQ session. What students ask me that if we keep on just reading the material, we cannot get whether we'll be able to solve the MCQs or not. Next thing is that I'm targeting all the types of medicos, that involves first of all MBBS students, nursing students, dental students. So yes, our MCQ levels are going to be having all the levels of difficulties. So yes, there will be some easy questions, there will be some difficult questions. See, the difficulty levels of the question is going to change depending on what exam you are going. But that being said, the concept behind that question is not going to be changed. That is going to remain the same, right? So that's why I want you to pause the video whenever I'm going to show you the question, solve by yourself, see whether you are answering it correctly or not. Okay, and these are the questions that I picked up from various different types of exams that the students go through, right? So that being said, let's dive into the questions. The first question for today's discussion is on your screen. Pause the video and answer the question by yourself and check or assess your knowledge on it. Okay, so first question is, which of the following has the highest content in the cell membrane? Option A is lipid, protein, carbohydrate, and phospholipid. So what it is asking? Highest content in the cell membrane. Go ahead and answer yourself. Most of the students, they give the answer as phospholipid, right? But this is the wrong answer. The right answer over here is proteins. Okay, what the examiner is asking, highest content in the cell membrane. The examiner is not asking you what is the main lipid over here, right? So let's see the diagram quickly. Look over here, this is the diagram of cell membrane. So what it is showing is that, suppose this is a cell, a very simple diagram of the cell, right? If I cut this part or I take this part and zoom it in, if I zoom it in, how it is going to look like? This is going to look something like this. Okay, it's a colored version, but yes, it is going to look like this. So the cell membrane, first of all, understand that it is the fluid mosaic model. Whenever we talk in terms of cell membrane, we talk in terms of fluid mosaic model, which is given by the Singer and Nicholson. So cell membrane, first of all, understand that there are various models are given by these various scientists, but yes, the most appropriate model is till date is the fluid mosaic model. Fluid mosaic model, and it is given by the scientist. There were two scientists, Singer and Nicholson. Singer and Nicholson in 1972. In 1972, they gave this model, fluid mosaic model. Now understand, fluid. What do you mean by fluid? Fluid over here represents the lipid. The lipid. Okay, and mosaic, what do you mean by mosaic? Understand, there are cultures in which there are different types of painting which represents that culture. Okay, if you see the Italian paintings or Iranian paintings, what they do have is the walls are colored not just with a single color, but they add on some color of different shapes. For example, if you are taking the wall, the plain simple pattern, there will be no regular pattern which can be seen on their walls. There will be some tiles of different shape, different colors. They will be put on randomly on that wall. Similarly, over here, the proteins in our cell membrane, they are randomly there inside the cell membrane. There is no pattern, there is no regularity in their arrangement, understand that. And these proteins represent the mosaic over here. So that's how, depending on their arrangement, this model was given by the Singer and Nicholson. So fluid, how to remember that in the exam? If you notice very keenly, you have L in the fluid, right? So you can get that as a clue that the fluid represents the lipid and mosaic represents the protein. Okay, now the question is asked that how much or what is the highest content. The question is asking about its content and its percentage, basically highest content, right? So I can divide the cell membrane into three different components which it is made up of, right? First thing, I'm going to take it as proteins, then the lipids, and then the proteins, lipids, and carbohydrate. I'm going to use the short form of the carbohydrate, that is CHO. Now, how much percentage the protein they're present in most of the cell membrane? That is 50 to 55%. Okay. What about the lipid? Lipids are 40 to 45%, and carbohydrate are less than or equal to 5%. They're present in the cell membrane. Now understand, we're not going to go in the detail very much, right? But mainly there are various types of lipids that are going to be present. But we talk a lot about lipids in the cell membrane. Why? Because they are the ones which gives the property, the main properties to the cell membrane, like solubility, flexibility, structural integrity, fluidity. Okay, so all the types of lipid like sphingolipids and phospholipids, glycolipids, they all are present. But the question comes that which of the following lipid is not present in the cell membrane? Okay, so understand that is one more question, that triglyceride is never present in any cell membrane in the human body. Okay, so that is one of the MCQ that might come, right? So all the types of lipids are present, even the cholesterol is present in the cell membrane, but not the triglyceride. Okay, as we talked about the lipid are having certain features, and what are their function? It gives a flexibility and fluidity. I'll write over here. It gives flexibility and fluidity. It maintains the structural integrity. It maintains the structural integrity. And also it gives the most important property to the cell membrane, and that is nothing but solubility. Why it is important? Because understand, our mode of treatment is going to change on the basis of this. Why? Because we are saying that the lipid is going to give the solubility property to the cell membrane. So that means the lipid soluble substances, they can cross the membrane. So understand, if there is an ointment which can cross the cell membrane. Why? Because it is containing lipid. For example, moisturizer, oil, what we do, we apply that locally. Okay, so it can be absorbed into the skin and it can be absorbed into that cell and show its effect. But if we talk in terms of the water soluble substances like some hormone, for example insulin, right? What happens in the insulin? We usually give the subcutaneous or IV doses, right? But we never apply the insulin on the skin. Why? Because it's a water soluble substance and it cannot be absorbed into the cell membrane, since the water soluble substances, they cannot cross the cell membrane. Okay, and that's why we have to change their mode of action. Okay, about the water soluble substances. What about the proteins? Proteins, there are many types of protein which are going to be present in the cell membrane. Now understand what is their function. Just now we talked that the lipid soluble substances, they get their way through the cell membrane via the lipids. Okay, they can easily diffuse into it. But what about the water soluble substances? We also need water soluble substances inside the cell to have their effects. So what is the way out? Over here the protein is going to help them out. How? They can act as a channel, they can act as a channel, carrier, or even the enzyme, enzymes, transporters, enzyme transporters, right? Channel, carrier, enzyme, transporter, what else? They can act as the receptors. They can act as receptors with the help of all these things, and with the help of proteins. The water soluble substances can also have their way into the cell membrane or out of the cell membrane. Okay, so yes, and the carbohydrate, they mainly act as a they help in the glycosylation where it is needed, and they can act as an antigen, especially in the RBC. In all other cells, mainly the proteins are going to act as the antigen. Okay, so this is the brief introduction to the cell membrane and how they are layered. Now look over here. So if we look into this fluid mosaic model, what we can see over here is there is a bilayer of phospholipid in which the proteins are randomly present, right? And that's why we call it as fluid mosaic model. Now understand why we call it as phospholipid bilayer over here. You can see that these over here are, I'll change the color, so you can see that these rounded structure and like these tails, they are the phospholipids. So if I draw one phospholipid, it is going to have two parts. What are the two parts? The head part and the tail part. Head part and the tail part. Now understand, this is called as amphipathic lipid. Amphipathic lipid. Now why this is called as amphipathic lipid? Which lipid we are talking about? We are talking about phospholipid. Amphi means both, right? Now what are the both properties it is having? Remember, there are two structures that we are talking in the phospholipid, that is head part and tail part. Head part contain phosphates. Understand, phosphate is an ion, right? And when there is an ion present, it can easily interact with the water. Okay, so that's why we call it as phospholipid. Why? Because this lipid contains the phosphate in the head part. Now this becomes the polar part, and it can easily interact with the water. So this becomes the hydrophilic part. Hydrophilic part. And the tail is the hydrophobic part. The tail is the hydrophobic part. Now understand what you mean by hydrophilic and phobic. Hydrophilic is nothing but it loves the water. It can easily interact with the water. Okay, so even if you are having the problem to remember that, over here in the philic you have L, right? And we are talking about water, so H2O is water and L is for loving. Okay, so the head part is water loving, that is nothing but hydrophilic part. Okay, and phobia means excessive fear of anything, right? So phobia means it hates the water. Water and lipid, they're having completely different properties, right? So they are contrast to each other in a way, right? So I can say that this is hydrophobic. In other words, I can say that it is the lipophilic, right? I can say that it is lipophilic also. Okay, so that's why it is called as amphipathic lipid, and that's also the MCQ which usually comes, right? So remember that there are two parts that we talked about, head part and tail part. Head part hydrophilic, tail part hydrophobic. Fluid mosaic model, Singer and Nicholson, 1972. If the short note is coming in two for the 2 marks, you can write all these points over there. Okay, so with that being said, we can say that yes, now just now we saw that the proteins are having highest content. Even if in the exam, if you have problem in remembering, remember there are more alphabets in the protein as compared to the lipid. Okay, so you can say that yes, in a way the proteins anyhow having the dominant part, that is nothing but the highest content in most of the cell membrane. Okay, let's move on to the next concept. A researcher was studying the effect of bioavailability of the drug when applied topically. His focus was on amphipathic lipid that helps the drug to increase the bioavailability. Amphipathic lipid. Identify the target lipid. Just now we talked amphipathic, that means which is having the lipid which is having both the properties hydrophilic as well as hydrophobic, right? So we know the answer over here, that is nothing but phospholipid. I just told you that we never talk about triglycerol. or triglyceride in the cell membrane. Why? Because it is never present there. Okay, glycolipids and sphingolipids, they are there, but understand that they don't have the amphipathic property. Okay, now understand, this being amphipathic, there is a bilayer arrangement. Now why there is a bilayer arrangement? You can see the head part is facing outside also, and it is facing inside also. Why is that? Why there is a need of such thing? Now remember, when we are going to discuss the body water, then we'll discuss that outside the cell, the water is going to be present, and even water is also present inside the cell. Okay, so both the side the water is present, and the cell membrane has to interact with the water. So that's why that we call it as extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. Okay, and that's why we do have bilayer arrangement.